There's a metaphor that's been making its way across the industry of late that talks about the differences between pets and cattle. And although the cattle of this world probably don't appreciate the metaphor and what it intends to describe, this metaphor here is really designed to talk a bit about the differences between how you may have managed your Windows servers back in the old days and how you may deal with them as you start implementing things like Nano Server. In that metaphor, we start with the pets, which you probably already know if you have pets of your own, are things that you love and cherish. You spend time with them, you nurture and care for them. And when they have problems, you go to the doctor, to the veterinarian, to give them the necessary effort they need to get them back on their feet as quickly as possible. Now, pets are obviously a good thing. I have several of them myself, but they also fulfill a certain use case. Let's contrast them with cattle. Where with cattle, you don't necessarily, I guess, spend as much time with the loving and nurturing. You do want to ensure that each of your cattle there on your farm are going to continue to operate in the best ways you can. But if you have a cow, for example, that doesn't make its way back from the pasture, well, perhaps there's just slightly less of an issue there than if it were your favorite pet there inside your house. Cattle are designed to be replaceable in that if one of your cows happens to go awry, well, another cow can possibly there end up taking its place relatively easily. And again, although the cattle of the world probably don't appreciate this whole metaphor, at least when it comes to losing one cow and replacing it with another, this side describes more of how these nano servers here in our environment are intended to be managed. In a world with Nano Server, the whole point here is that you spend far less time trying to manage the discrete configuration on each machine. If for any reason you have an issue with a Nano Server, well, taking out that Nano Server and replacing it with another one you build entirely from scratch is designed to be the whole way in which you fix problems. I introduced this here because our discussion on Nano Server has been moved over to an entirely different module here in this course, because the ways in which you install, deploy, and manage Nano Server are entirely different. You're used to obviously booting up from the DVD media to get yourself to that Windows PE environment for actually getting an operating system deployed there in older versions of Windows Server. That same Windows PE environment does not, in this version, include the abilities to deploy Nano Server. And so here in this module, we're going to have to spend some extra time then figuring out exactly how we get those Nano Server bits installed into a virtual machine or also onto a host. Now, I've started off this module with some of the reasons or differences in how you manage Nano Server, but we also want to start here with just some of the usage scenarios as to where you might end up deploying it. The reality is that Nano Server really is Microsoft's most bleeding edge in terms of where they're reaching in the medium-term and far-term future of Microsoft Windows. And so these usage scenarios you'll find are fairly minimal in terms of where and when you might implement Nano Server. And in fact, there's an argument that even at this version, you might not find yourself implementing Nano Server at all in production. This implementation of Nano Server, this version, at least right now today, because of the very limited usage scenarios that are out there, and still some of the developing management tools and management practices surrounding Nano Server, we are still fairly nascent in terms of people's embrace of this technology. The more true reality is that your experience here with Nano Server is probably preparing yourself or future-proofing yourself for a version of Microsoft Windows that perhaps is just a bit further in the future. Now, we will obviously install Nano Server both into a virtual machine and onto a physical piece of hardware, the latter of which is really not one of the intended usage scenarios for the implementation of Nano Server. You'll find that it's relatively easy to deploy Nano Server on top of a Hyper-V host, but it gets quite a bit more difficult when you have some of the other usual things that are required as part of a server installation, like the application of drivers and updates and so on. We will, with those Nano Server instances then installed, go through some of the management tasks like installing roles and features there on our Nano Server. I'll show you just some of the commandlets you'll need to know in order to get those roles and features there installed. I've already talked about how Nano Server is a near headless solution. There really isn't all that you can do there, if anything at all, there on the head of the server itself. And so the management and configuration of Nano Server really is the remote management and configuration of Nano Server, and that itself really is Windows PowerShell. So the entirety of our conversation here is going to focus then on the management of Nano Server using the different PowerShell commands that you're going to need to know. And I should mention too that everything that you'll be seeing here, just like in that immediately previous module, I'm going to go through a long list there of PowerShell commands, but in the extra content associated with this course, you'll find that list in order of the commands that I execute here. So if for some reason you can't see the commands, or if you want to have your own copy of them, then take a look at that extra content there to find the entire list of what you can use and replicate in your own demonstration environment. To that end, if you are planning on following along with the different demonstrations that I'll be showing you here, there are a couple of prerequisites that you'll need to have laid into place. First and foremost will be a domain controller, which you can choose to build in whatever way you should choose. You can build that domain controller either manually, I'll be using the domain name company.pri, or you could use that domain controller script that exists there as part of the extra content associated with this course in that previous module. Back in that previous module, we went through the implementation of that script to very quickly bring online a domain controller you can use. And so it's that script that effectively I have here in this environment to create my machine dc.company.pri. You also will want to build a Windows 10 instance and join it there to your Active Directory domain. This was optional back in our last module, but is a bit more required here because we want to show the actions and activities in remotely managing a nanoserver instance, or a couple of nanoserver instances. And so it's there inside of Windows 10 that we'll do a lot of the management here by remotely accessing that machine and running the commands there on the servers themselves. You also will want to, there on your Windows 10 device, go ahead and enable Hyper-V on that device. Or if you have Hyper-V on some other machine in your environment, be prepared to work with that Hyper-V instance there. We in this environment are going to take the Nano server download, the WIM file that exists there on the DVD ISO, and then wrap it up and deploy it off as a Hyper-V virtual machine. This presents the easiest deployment of Nano server to a virtual machine because of the commandlets that exist here with Hyper-V. And so even if you're working here in VMware Workstation as the hypervisor you're using for building these virtual machines, on that Windows 10 instance itself, you can also go about enabling Hyper-V to create this nested environment just for the deployment of these couple of Nano servers that we'll be working with. So I'll assume here that you've enabled Hyper-V on your Windows 10 instance, or that you have some other machine that you can interface with in order to run these Nano servers that we'll be working with.